You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of one of the world's preeminent auteurs in cinema right now, Yorgos Lanthimos, who has unexpectedly risen to the very top of global consensus of acclaim, given his incredibly dark films of his early career, and has kind of taken the place of the Mexican auteurs this decade. I mentioned, no one really mentions that 5 of the Best Picture winners, Best Director Oscars in the 2010s went to Mexicans. Like half of them went to Mexican directors. We talk about the Asian directors when they bubble up, being this huge thing, but we never really say, half of the Best Director awards went to Mexico. So he's like the most prominent Greek filmmaker in a very long time, and has a very wide range, actually. I shamefully only came to know him through The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was... I've actually got a few of his films to still watch, The Lobster and Dogtooth, which I'm looking forward to immensely. He seems to be able to do these incredibly punishing, dark, uncomfortable films with very, very dark content, or these incredibly vivid maximalist films. So his last 2 films, Poor Things and The Favourite, were nominated for multiple Oscars. I thought The Favourite was an absolute masterpiece, fantastic film about, I guess, Elizabethan England or Victorian England, I'm not sure exactly the era, with 3 Oscar-worthy leads. Olivia Colman, for me, was 3rd place out of the Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz. I thought was probably my favourite actor in that film. And followed it up with Poor Things, which is the most vivid, widescreen, fantastical film he's made. And these 2, got loads of Oscar nominations. Personally, I said that I thought that Poor Things, no matter how original and brilliant it was a bit superficial. It didn't really get under the skin of the incredible themes that it threw up in the air. But still, that's saying, is it the best film of the year? It was one of the best films of the year, but I don't think it was the best. Well, while he was making Poor Things, which was horrendously delayed due to, I think, COVID or some other factors, he'd already started, I believe, on Kinds of Kindness, which is a 3-part film, 3 different stories, with some connected themes, but not completely. So the release of, the Oscar Best Picture nomination for Poor Things was only a couple of months, I think, before they started showing Kinds of Kindness, because he'd been making it for so long anyway. This, if you're watching his films, is not the kind of audience-pleasing fare of The Favourite or of Poor Things at all. This is a 3-hour version of The Killing of a Sacred Deer, but somehow actually even more punishing. He uses, in a sort of Cloud Atlas way, I've always kind of liked this when directors do what they did in Cloud Atlas, was have these anthology things, but use the same actors in each having different roles, which I thought was fascinating. The first sequence is, they're all loosely around the letters RMF, which relate to a person in them. The first story is about how William Dafoe controls every aspect of Jesse Plemons' life. So Jesse Plemons has a high-paying job, is obviously too stupid to be up there, but his payoff is that he lets his boss control his life. And one of the overriding themes is about control, about people in positions of power controlling someone else, although that doesn't work in every story in the same way. So William Dafoe gives him lists. At 8:15, you will make love to your wife. At 8:30, you will have specifically this juice, and so on, throughout his whole life. And it extends to extreme notions about you cannot have children, and so on. So we follow Jesse Plemons and his wife until he reaches breaking point, which comes around the boss asking him to be involved in the car crash, and when he's not injured sufficiently in the car crash, to do it again. And Jesse Plemons is like, I'm going to kill this guy in the other car. And he's like, yep. And he's like, I can't do that. And the ramifications of him breaking himself off, I guess the strongest themes here are how people show up for abuse. If you've been controlled long enough, and I have had this in my past, you show up for abuse. You will put up with it because you've already been gaslit to the point where you have no agency, where there's nothing else in your life. That's why women don't leave, because they've already reached the point of becoming so weak. Something as strong as breaking that and leaving is far beyond the capability you have at the time. So it's pretty grim stuff. Over the first two stories where Jesse Plemons is the lead actor, is the best of his entire career. I've found his character and performance in The Killers of the Flower Moon, the Scorsese film, which I didn't give a good review to at all, to be the worst. I thought it was a trite character, badly played. This is the best acting I've seen him do over two quite different characters. He's a pathetic human being. You have no love for him at all. And you kind of even respect William Dafoe more. And the other major actors that show up are Emma Stone, who's been in many films with this director, and also Margaret Qualley, who's having the best year. Margaret Qualley has been in this and is getting rave reviews for Substance, and I think a third film this year. So she is having the best year of her career. She doesn't really get a major role in these films. She's one of the, there's like 6 or 7 main actors that are used in every one. She doesn't have the main roles in any of the films, in any of the 3 stories. Jesse Plemons is the dominant one in the first one. We move on to a very unknowably weird story where Jesse Plemons is again the lead, and his wife, he's a cop, and his wife's gone missing at sea. And he's gone off the rails and starts behaving in an extremely bad manner. The twist comes when his wife returns and he doesn't believe it's her, which is something that has happened in a few other, mainly I think novellas and short stories. But his behaviour becomes even worse. And there are some very uncomfortable sequences, very, very uncomfortable sequences. Hong Chow is in, I think she's in all of them she's in all of them as well. Joe Alwyn's in all of them. And Mamadou Athie has smaller roles and he's in all of them. Hunter Schafer is also, I think she's at the start of the third story, which is a much more, the first 2 stories are fairly analogous, I felt, even though they're different settings and everything, but they felt like continuations, whereas the third one is about religious people who belong to a cult led by Willem Dafoe again, probably echoing William Dafoe as the billionaire who abuses everyone around him in the first film. But here he's the leader of a sex cult, controls everyone, and sends Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons out on the road to find the Messiah. They believe that they've got this prediction on who the Messiah will be, and that they have to meet certain criteria. You've got to be a twin, your twin had to have died, and so on. And they interview everyone that's a potential candidate for reviving the dead. It's a different tone and style to the other 2, and I thought it perhaps stopped there being a cohesive whole to the Enterprise, as in these are the specific themes. I felt like, she is under the control of the cult, and her life is destroyed once the cult has, discommunicated her. She's, back in the same boat. I felt it wrapped itself up into zany and comedic a manner, although it was much more satisfying than the other 2 in the way that it resolved itself. I felt it was a little bit cheap and a bit of a get out of jail free scenario. Probably the strongest overall was the middle sequence where Jesse Plemons is a cop and Emma Stone's his wife has been lost at sea, And I saw the interest there was the power dynamic between the two seemed to be fairly balanced. So William Dafoe was at the top in the final one, and William Dafoe was at the top in the first sequence. But I didn't feel like there was anyone in an abusive position of power, even though they both abuse their positions of power. And it was also probably the most unknowable of the sequences, and disturbing. This is a punishing film. I am very glad that I sat down and watched this without reading up on it at all. If I find a film sounds very interesting, and this was very divisive amongst critics compared to the universal praise of his recent films, this has got the most diversive response from critics. I'm glad I didn't see it as 2 hours 45 long, because it's kind of like he sets out to punish you. It feels like he has given you these gifts with these very engaging films, which are very easy to watch, and now we're right back in this very uncomfortable landscape of this surreal killing of a sacred deer, but more punishing and less satisfying and less knowable. The resolutions aren't there. It felt long. It felt really long. It's Beau's Afraid. That is a long film and very punishing on the viewer, but there's a wildness to it that carried me through that film. I thought it was fantastic. This isn't a film that I'll sit through again. Jesse Plemons is magnificent. Emma Stone is very good in the final third, but he is the standout actor. I'm a bit annoyed that they did such a different final third. I feel like he would be up for multiple awards, but he's sidelined in the final third. I wish all three had had him in a similar boat, rather than have two analogous stories and one that was very different. I'm not sure what was going on there. It's uncomfortable to watch. It feels like it's challenging you to get through it. There's obviously an awful lot here that is stunning, but it's also not satisfying and maybe not even that resolved in what it's trying to say, other than we dare you to spend another 10 minutes with these awful people and this very challenging triptych of films. So, yeah, I did like Killing of a Sacred Deer. I'm probably not going to put it on for a laugh. This, half as much. I feel like he deliberately did it just to say, look, I've made these two big Hollywood films and now you're going to get it with both barrels. And there is lots that's amazing here, and the dynamics are often very interesting. But also, the flaw of Poor Things was that I didn't feel like that they were played out enough to justify making us go through them. Whereas Poor Things just threw these ideas up in the air. I didn't feel like it was deep enough to fully explore them. Whereas this time around, I think he hints at things and lets the viewer hold on for dear life as we get through them. So I'm going to give Kinds of Kindness, one of the year's most interesting films, one of the hardest slogs. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.